a cryogenically frozen cop, a toilet gag nobody can explain, a fast food chain cast as the last restaurant on Earth. In October 1993, Warner Brothers released a movie that somehow predicted video calls and cashless society, while also insisting the future runs on seashells instead of toilet paper. Directed by Marco Brambilla in his feature debut, Demolition Man paired Sylvester Stallone's John Spartan against Wesley Snipes' Simon Phoenix, with Sandra Bullock as the 1990s obsessed cop caught in the middle. 30-plus years later, the behind-the-scenes stories are almost as strange as anything that happens on screen. Here are 15 of them, counting down to the one where two fast food giants fought a war neither of them knew they'd won. The single most debated prop in 90s sci-fi is a trio of decorative shells sitting next to a toilet, and the film never tells you what they're for. Screenwriter Daniel Waters later explained where the idea actually came from at a Q&A years after release. He was stuck trying to invent futuristic bathroom fixtures, called a fellow screenwriter for help, and that writer happened to be using his own bathroom at the moment the phone rang. Sitting there, he glanced at a decorative bag of seashells on his toilet tank and offered it up as a joke. Waters wrote it into the script, and a mystery was born entirely by accident. Fans have spent decades trying to fill in the blank. Stallone offered his own theory in a 2006 interview, describing a method involving two shells used like chopsticks and a third for scraping, an answer Waters reportedly considered too graphic to confirm outright. Rob Schneider, who has a small role in the film, floated a separate theory that the shells conceal a hidden dispenser. Waters never gave a definitive answer either way, and that refusal to explain is exactly why the joke has outlived the movie itself. Wesley Snipes is a genuine martial artist, holding real black belt credentials, and it became a technical headache on set. During fight choreography, his kicks and strikes moved so quickly that 1993-era film cameras couldn't register them cleanly. The strikes blurred into smears on the dailies instead of clean, readable hits. Crew members reportedly had to ask him to slow down and exaggerate his movements, the opposite of the note most action stars get. Stallone took a different approach to keeping up physically. Rather than asking Snipes to soften his hits, accounts describe Stallone wearing reinforced padding under his costume so that contact during their fight scenes could be genuinely thrown rather than faked. The friction between the two actors, one holding back, one bracing for real impact, is part of why their final confrontation reads as unusually physical for a studio action film of the era. Most low-budget science fiction fakes its future vehicles with fiberglass shells over ordinary chassis. Demolition Man instead borrowed real, drivable concept cars directly from General Motors, including the 1992 GM Ultralight, a carbon fiber, gull-wing prototype built to test extreme fuel efficiency. Rated by the EPA at roughly 88 miles per gallon. GM had built only a couple of running ultralights, and one of them became the basis for San Angeles' futuristic police cruiser, complete with the Chevrolet badge slapped on for the film. The ultralight wasn't the only rarity on set. Other GM show cars from the late 80s and early 90s, including the Pontiac Banshee and the Cadillac Aurora concept, appear throughout the film's background traffic, giving 2032 an unusually authentic showroom sheen. Several of these prototypes still survive today. The ultralight has been displayed at automotive museums, looking, decades later, more futuristic than most cars actually built since. The title didn't originate with the screenplay. It came from a post-punk deep cut. Sting wrote Demolition Man back in 1981 while staying at actor Peter O'Toole's house in Ireland, and rather than taking it straight to his own band, he first gave the song to Grace Jones, who released her version as a single in February of that year. The Police recorded their own harder-edged rendition shortly after, placing it on their album Ghost in the Machine. For the 1993 film, Sting returned to the studio and re-recorded the track with a heavier, more industrial arrangement to match the movie's neon corporate future, releasing it on an EP tied to the film. Producer Joel Silver was reportedly enough of a fan of the original song that its title effectively became the movie's title, meaning a major studio action tentpole ended up named after a 12-year-old album cut that most audiences had never heard. Before Wesley Snipes signed on, Sylvester Stallone personally pushed to cast Jackie Chan as Simon Phoenix, reasoning that Chan's real-world athleticism would translate into spectacular fight choreography. Chan declined. At the time, Chan had built his career almost exclusively around heroic, family-friendly protagonists across Hong Kong and early Hollywood productions, and he was wary that Asian audiences in particular would react badly to seeing him play a remorseless villain, a persona shift he wasn't willing to risk. Producers reportedly also approached other action names before settling on Snipes, who initially turned the role down multiple times until producer Joel Silver and director Marco Brambilla visited him in person on the set of another film to convince him. Once Snipes took the part and dyed his hair platinum blonde for it, critics at the time singled him out as the film's most memorable element, a performance built entirely out of the role Jackie Chan didn't want. The cryogenic freezing sequence required Stallone to be sealed into a form-fitting mold, locked into a vertical rig, and coated in a thick gel meant to simulate cryofluid, for stretches lasting several hours at a time, largely immobile. Stallone has openly discussed being claustrophobic, and by his own account, the shoot ranked among the worst experiences of his career. In one on-record description, he called the setup one of the roughest stretches he's ever endured on a film set. That tension shows up on screen, even though the scene is staged to look calm and heroic. What plays as stoic, frozen composure in the final cut was, according to Stallone's own account, a real fight against genuine unease, a rare case where a big-budget spectacle sequence is quietly powered by an actor's actual discomfort rather than performance. Demolition Man barely finished its theatrical run before the licensing machine kicked in. DC Comics published a Demolition Man miniseries, retelling the film's plot with additional internal narration, running from late 1993 into early 1994 to coincide with the film's home video release. It's a fairly straightforward adaptation, but its existence says something about how thoroughly 90s studios cross-merchandised even R-rated action movies. The video game version had a rougher road. Acclaim published 16-bit action platformer versions for Genesis, Super NES, and Sega CD, built around run-and-gun combat as John Spartan hunting down Simon Phoenix, while a separate, differently structured version arrived for the 3DO from Virgin Interactive. Reception at the time was mixed at best, but together the comic and the games stretched the property's shelf life well past what the film's mixed critical reception might have predicted on its own. In Kuwait, Demolition Man wasn't released under its own name. It was retitled Rambo the Destroyer for the local market. The logic tracked with how distributors handled Stallone's brand recognition in regions where his newer projects weren't yet established. Rather than build awareness for an unfamiliar new title, some international distributors leaned on the guaranteed pull of his most famous character instead. It meant that audiences buying tickets under that title in 1993 walked in expecting another chapter of jungle warfare, and instead got platinum blonde Wesley Snipes fighting in a cryo-prison, while Sandra Bullock explained a society that had outlawed physical contact. Whatever the marketing logic, it's a reminder of how loosely filmed titles could be treated overseas in the pre-internet era, when regional distributors had far more freedom to rebrand a movie however they thought would sell tickets. Long before Tenacious D or School of Rock, a 23-year-old Jack Black appears in Demolition Man's underground scenes, credited as Wasteland Scrap. He's part of Edgar Friendly's resistance group, visible in a handful of shots as Spartan and Huxley meet the underground community, though by most accounts, he doesn't get a spoken line in the finished film, making this one of the quieter blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearances from a future comedy star. At the time, Black was working through minor television guest spots, years away from the roles that would define his career. It's a small footnote in retrospect, but it places him in the same 1993 release window as Jurassic Park and The Fugitive, early proof of just how many working actors were cycling through the era's genre pictures before their careers took off. Before Sandra Bullock became the film's optimistic, 90s-obsessed future cop, the role belonged to Lori Petty, fresh off Point Break and A League of Their Own. Petty was cast, reported for filming, and was let go roughly 2 to 3 days into production. Producer Joel Silver publicly cited creative differences, while contemporaneous reporting suggested the studio wasn't satisfied with her dailies, and Petty herself later described her working relationship with Stallone as strained. Sandra Bullock was brought in on short notice to replace her. The character's name carries its own quiet literary reference that plenty of viewers miss. Lenina Huxley nods directly to Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, a novel about a sanitized, pleasure-managed society that suppresses individuality in the name of order. A fairly pointed choice of surname for an optimistic cop serving exactly that kind of system. Bullock's performance, delivered a year before her breakout in Speed, helped launch her into leading roles, even though it also earned her a Golden Raspberry nomination at the time. Hungarian science fiction author Istvan Nemira has stated publicly that Demolition Man's core premise closely mirrors his own 1986 novel, Holtak Harka, Fight of the Dead, in which a terrorist and the soldier hunting him are both cryogenically frozen and later revived into a future where violence has been engineered out of society. Nemira claimed a copyright committee in Hungary found the film to be a substantial match to his book, though no independent documentation of that finding has surfaced publicly, and Warner Brothers never issued a public response to the allegation. Nemira said he chose not to pursue legal action because mounting an international intellectual property case against a major Hollywood studio from Eastern Europe in the 1990s was financially out of reach for him. He also suggested more broadly that Western studios drew on Eastern European science fiction without credit in the years following the fall of the Iron Curtain. Whether or not the resemblance amounts to plagiarism, Cryogenic Sleeper in a Pacified Future is also a familiar science fiction setup on its own, going back decades before either work. Early drafts of the script reportedly began entirely in the 2032 timeline, opening with Spartan already thawed and dropping the audience straight into exposition about the sanitized future society, a structurally risky choice for what was being sold as a Stallone action vehicle. Screenwriter Fred Decker came aboard for uncredited rewrites and pushed for restructuring the film to open with the chaotic 1996 hostage sequence first, establishing Spartan and Phoenix in their original, destructive element before jumping decades ahead. That structural change gives the sanitized future its punch by contrast, without first showing the audience the mess these two men come from. The calm, polite version of Los Angeles they wake up into simply reads as a mildly odd city rather than a genuine culture shock. The now iconic prologue exists specifically because someone recognized that the joke of the future doesn't land without seeing the past it's reacting against. According to commentary included on the film's Region 1 DVD release, an earlier cut of Demolition Man contained a subplot in which Simon Phoenix murders Zachary Lamb, the mentor figure played by Bill Cobbs, who helps guide Spartan through the unfamiliar future. That material didn't survive to the theatrical cut, trimmed for pacing along with other footage during editing. Deleted material like this is common in big studio productions, but it's a reminder that the tonal balance of a finished film, how dark it's allowed to get before cutting back to comedy, is often decided in the editing room rather than on the page. A movie built around banned swearing and seashell toilet paper still had to calibrate exactly how much genuine loss its story could carry before the satire stopped working. Despite Demolition Man being an R-rated film built around a villain who kills with real enthusiasm, Mattel released a full action figure line in 1993 to tie into it. Rather than sculpting new molds, reporting on the toy line indicates Mattel largely reused body parts and armor pieces from its unsuccessful 1989 relaunch. The New Adventures of He-Man, meaning John Spartan figures, were, structurally, repainted He-Man torsos in futuristic cop gear. The line included multiple versions of Spartan and Phoenix, but reportedly no figure of Sandra Bullock's Lenina Huxley at all, despite her prominent billing in the film. Coupled with a movie that clearly wasn't aimed at children, the toys reportedly moved slowly and were often found discounted on clearance shelves within a year of release, though today they're collected less for craftsmanship and more as an oddly perfect artifact of how loosely toy licensing decisions were made in the early 90s. In the film's version of 2032, a corporate conflict called the Franchise Wars wiped out every restaurant chain except one, and in the U.S. release, that lone survivor is Taco Bell, now marketed as fine dining. What makes the gag work in America doesn't necessarily work everywhere. At the time the film was made, Taco Bell had virtually no presence in Europe, so audiences there wouldn't have recognized the joke. The solution was a full post-production swap for European markets, replacing Taco Bell references with Pizza Hut through redubbed dialogue and digitally altered signage and logos. while the US and UK theatrical versions kept Taco Bell intact. This was only feasible because both chains were owned by PepsiCo at the time, alongside KFC, making the substitution a matter of licensing rather than negotiating with an outside company. The result is a genuinely different version of the same scene, depending on where you saw it, and decades of online arguments between people who saw different regional cuts and assumed everyone else was misremembering the film. That's 15 strange, verified footnotes behind a movie that spent 3 decades being quoted, memed, and argued about mostly because of a toilet joke nobody will fully explain. Which fact surprised you the most, the Seashells, the concept car fleet, or the country that thought it was getting a new Rambo movie? However you found your way here, it's a strange little snapshot of how much genuine chaos can sit behind a movie that most people remember as just a goofy 90s action flick.